Can you really handle all this by yourself? Trevor's voice dripped with condescension as he stood in my kitchen, gesturing toward the towering stack of property documents spread across my worn wooden table. His words stung, laced with that familiar tone of superiority that I'd endured for far too long. These rental properties aren't a game, Ruth. They require serious management skills, the kind of expertise you might not have. Maybe, just maybe, you should let someone with actual business experience take the lead. I looked up from the paperwork, my jaw clenched so tightly I could feel the tension radiating through my temples. It had been exactly 4 days since I'd inherited 5 rental properties from my late Aunt Beverly in Phoenix, Arizona, a windfall that still felt surreal. Somehow, in that short time, my ex-husband had already sniffed out my good fortune, like a vulture circling a fresh opportunity. The audacity of this man never ceased to amaze me. My name is Ruth Patterson. I'm 47 years old, and I've built a steady life as a dental hygienist in Tucson. For the past 3 years, since our bitter divorce, I've carved out a quiet, stable existence, my small but cozy apartment, my reliable job at Dr. Henderson's dental practice, and, most importantly, my freedom from Trevor's relentless need to control every facet of my life. Yet here he was, standing in my kitchen with his slicked back hair and that infuriating smirk, trying to slither his way back into my world through the promise of my newfound wealth. I didn't ask for your help, Trevor, I said firmly, pulling the documents closer to me as if shielding them from his grasp. And I certainly don't need your so-called business expertise. He let out a laugh, that same patronizing chuckle that had grated on my nerves for the 15 years we were married. Come on, Ruth. You're a dental hygienist, not a property mogul. What do you know about managing tenants, navigating real estate law, or maximizing investment potential? These properties are worth over $800,000 combined. One misstep, and you could lose everything. The figure $800,000 sent a flutter of excitement and anxiety through my stomach. My Aunt Beverly had been far more generous than I'd ever imagined. We hadn't been particularly close. She was my father's sister, a sharp and successful real estate investor who'd never married or had children. When her lawyer called to inform me I was the sole beneficiary of her property portfolio, I was utterly stunned. It was a gift, a chance at a new chapter, but also a daunting responsibility. I'm perfectly capable of learning what I need to know, I replied, my voice steady despite the doubts swirling in my mind. But Trevor just shook his head, his expression a mix of pity and opportunism. Learning on the job with that kind of money at stake? That's a risky move, Ruth. Look, I know we have our history, but I've been managing commercial properties for Kellerman Associates for over a decade. I could help you not just manage these properties, but turn them into a thriving investment. Maybe even expand the portfolio. There it was, the hook. Trevor's eyes gleamed with dollar signs, the same greedy glint I'd seen countless times during our marriage. He wasn't here to help me. He was here to help himself. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head, calculating how he could insert himself into this windfall and claim a piece of it for his OWN.AS. Trevor leaned casually against my kitchen counter, as if he belonged there. A cold resolve settled in my chest. This wasn't about partnership or support. This was about control, just like everything else had been during our marriage. The memories flooded back, unbidden but vivid, as I stared at his expectant face. For 15 years, every decision had to pass through Trevor's approval. When I wanted to go back to school to become a dental hygienist, he dismissed it as impractical, a waste of time. When I saved up money from my part-time retail job to buy a modest car, he convinced me to invest it in our future, which always meant his risky business ventures that inevitably failed. The worst part? He'd made it seem reasonable, even caring. I'm just looking out for us, he'd say, his voice smooth as silk. Trust me, honey, when have I ever steered you wrong? Oh, he'd steered me wrong plenty. There was the time he persuaded me to co-sign on his doomed restaurant investment, leaving us $30,000 in debt. Or when he drained our joint savings for a pyramid scheme that promised riches, but delivered nothing but empty promises. Each time, when his grand plans collapsed, it was somehow my fault for not being supportive enough. The divorce 3 years ago had been a grueling battle. Trevor fought me over every asset, claiming he deserved the lion's share because he'd been the primary breadwinner. Never mind that I'd worked multiple jobs to keep us afloat while he chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another. In the end, I walked away with just enough to rent my small apartment and start over. But that fresh start? It was the best thing that ever happened to me. For the first time in decades, I could make decisions without someone questioning my judgment or undermining my confidence. I threw myself into my work at the dental practice, building trust with patients and earning Dr. Henderson's respect. I even started taking evening classes in business management, something I'd always dreamed of but never dared pursue while married to Trevor. You're awfully quiet, Trevor said, snapping me back to the present. I hope you're not seriously considering managing these properties alone. The Phoenix rental market is cutthroat, Ruth. One mistake could cost you thousands. I studied his face, noting how his eyes kept darting to the property documents, hungry for the opportunity to seize control. There was something else in his expression, a calculating look I recognized from our marriage. He wasn't just offering help, he was positioning himself to take over entirely. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, my voice measured, careful not to betray the anger simmering beneath the surface. Trevor's face lit up, mistaking my question for interest. Well, I was thinking we could form a partnership. I'd handle the day-to-day management, collecting rent, coordinating repairs, dealing with tenant complaints, and you'd remain the owner. We'd split the management fees, say 60/40ths in my favor, since I'd be doing the heavy lifting. 60/40 in his favor. Of course. The man hadn't changed a bit. And what makes you think I'd want to go into business with my ex-husband? I asked, my tone sharp. His smile faltered, but only for a moment. Because you need help, Ruth. And because, despite everything that happened between us, I still care about your financial security. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a fleeting moment, I almost believed him. I need some time to think about it, I said finally, knowing it would buy me the space to strategize. Trevor's face brightened with misplaced triumph, clearly thinking he'd won me over. Take all the time you need, but don't wait too long. The rental market moves fast, and these properties need active management. I'd hate to see you lose money while you're deliberating. After Trevor left, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the documents that represented both a golden opportunity and a daunting challenge. The rational part of my brain knew Trevor was wrong. I was capable of managing these properties. But the voice conditioned by 15 years of his manipulation whispered doubts. Maybe he's right. Maybe you're in over your head. That evening, I called my friend Janet, a paralegal who'd been my rock during the divorce. Janet, I need advice about protecting assets, I said without preamble. Ruth, what's going on? You sound stressed, she replied, her voice warm with concern. I poured out the story, my inheritance, Trevor's sudden reappearance, his aggressive push for a partnership. Janet listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I mentioned his 60/40ths proposal. Ruth, you cannot let that man anywhere near your inheritance, she said firmly. I've seen this pattern before. He's going to find a way to claim control, and you'll end up losing everything you've gained. But what if he's right? What if I can't handle this alone? I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me. Listen to me, Janet said, her tone commanding, like she was addressing a courtroom. You've been managing your own life just fine for 3 years. You've built a career, maintained your independence, and made smart financial choices. Don't let him gaslight you into thinking you're incompetent. Her words were like a splash of cold water, waking me from a fog of self-doubt. Gaslighting. That's exactly what this was, the same manipulative tactics that had defined our marriage. Trevor wasn't offering help. He was trying to seize control of my newfound wealth. What should I do? I asked, feeling a spark of determination ignite within me. First, you're going to set up a trust to protect these properties. Second, you'll establish an LLC for property management. Third, you're going to document every interaction with Trevor from now on. And fourth, if he keeps pushing this partnership, you're going to shut it down hard. For the first time in days, I felt a surge of excitement, not just determination. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was a chance to prove to myself and everyone else that I was capable of so much more than anyone, especially Trevor, had ever given me credit for. "Janet," I said, a smile creeping into my voice, "I think I'm ready to show Trevor exactly what this dental hygienist can accomplish." The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the day my divorce was finalized. It was time to take charge. On Monday, I took a personal day from the dental practice and drove to Phoenix to see my inherited properties for the first time. Janet had recommended a lawyer, Howard Brennan, who specialized in estate planning and asset protection, and I had an appointment scheduled for the afternoon. But first, I wanted to see what I was dealing with. The properties were scattered across 3 neighborhoods, all in desirable areas with strong rental potential. There was a duplex in Scottsdale, 2 single-family homes in Tempe, and a small apartment building with 4 units in Central Phoenix. As I walked through each property, I felt a growing sense of pride and possibility. Aunt Beverly had been a shrewd investor. These weren't dilapidated buildings needing major repairs. They were well-maintained rentals in stable, thriving neighborhoods. At the apartment building, I met Mrs. Rodriguez, a tenant who'd lived there for 6 years. "Your aunt was a wonderful landlord," she told me as we chatted in the sunny courtyard. "Always fair, always quick to fix anything that broke. I hope you'll be the same." I planned to be, I assured her, and I meant every word. This wasn't just about the money, it was about providing good homes for people, building something meaningful that honored my aunt's legacy. My meeting with Howard Brennan went better than I'd hoped. He was a sharp-eyed man in his 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that inspired confidence. "You're smart to be proactive about this," he said, jotting notes on a legal pad as I explained my situation with Trevor. "What you need is a revocable living trust to hold all the properties and a limited liability company to manage them. That creates multiple layers of protection." "How long will that take to set up?" I asked, eager to secure my assets. "If you're serious about moving quickly, I can have the paperwork ready by Friday," he replied. "The trust will name you as the sole trustee and beneficiary, and the LLC will be structured, so only you have signatory authority. Even if someone tries to claim ownership or control, they'll have no legal standing." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "And if my ex-husband tries to insert himself into the business?" I asked. Howard's smile was grim but reassuring. "Unless you voluntarily add him to the trust or LLC, he has absolutely no rights to these properties or their income. If he tries to interfere or makes fraudulent claims, you'd have grounds for a harassment lawsuit." That evening, as I cooked dinner, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Trevor. "Ruth, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I have some ideas for maximizing your rental income. I'd like to come by tomorrow evening to go over some proposals. I think you'll be impressed with what I've put together." The presumption in his tone made my blood boil. He was already acting like we were partners, like my inheritance was his to manage. I deleted the message without calling him back. The next morning at work, I found myself humming as I cleaned patients' teeth, my mood noticeably lighter. Dr. Henderson, my employer, picked up on it during our coffee break. "You seem particularly cheerful today, Ruth. Good news?" I'd always liked Dr. Henderson. He was a fair boss who treated his staff with respect. "I inherited some rental properties from my aunt," I told him. "I'm setting up a business to manage them." His eyebrows rose with interest. "That's wonderful. Real estate can be very rewarding if you approach it thoughtfully. My daughter manages commercial properties downtown. She always says the key is having good systems and treating tenants fairly." "That's exactly what I'm planning to do," I said, feeling another surge of confidence. But that evening, my newfound optimism was tested. Trevor was waiting in my building's parking lot, leaning against his car with a thick folder in his hands. My heart sank. I'd hoped to avoid this confrontation until my legal protections were in place. "There you are," he called out as I parked. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "What are you doing here, Trevor?" I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. He held up the folder with a smug grin. "I told you I had proposals to share. I've put together a complete business plan for your properties, market analysis, rental rate optimization, maintenance schedules, the works. This is professional level work, Ruth, the kind my firm charges thousands for. I reluctantly let him follow me up to my apartment, telling myself I needed to hear his pitch to prepare my defenses. He spread his documents across my coffee table with the enthusiasm of a salesman closing a big deal. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Your current rental rates are at least 15% below market value. With proper management, you could increase your monthly income from $4,800 to over $5,500. I had to admit, the numbers looked impressive. Trevor had clearly done his research, analyzing comparable properties and market trends. But as I examined the documents, something troubling caught my eye. These projections assume significant rent increases, I said. Some of my tenants have been in their units for years. I can't just jack up their rent because the market allows it. Trevor's expression flashed with impatience. "Ruth, this is business, not charity. If you're not maximizing your return on investment, you're essentially losing money. Good tenants will adapt to reasonable increases, and the ones who can't afford market rates? Well, that's what turnover is for." The callousness in his tone reminded me why I'd grown to resent him during our marriage. Everything was about profit margins, never about the human cost of his decisions. And here's the management structure I'm proposing, Trevor continued, flipping to another document. "I'll establish a subsidiary of my current firm to manage your properties. You'll be listed as the primary owner, but I'll have full operational authority. It's the most efficient way to handle the day-to-day operations." I stared at the organizational chart he'd drawn up. He'd already named our supposed partnership after his company and positioned himself as the general manager with authority over all major decisions. "Full operational authority?" I repeated slowly. "What does that mean exactly?" "Lease agreements, tenant selection, maintenance contracts, rent collection, all the decisions that require quick action and industry expertise," he said smoothly. "You'd retain ownership and receive your share of the profits, but the actual management would be my responsibility." My anger was building, but I kept my voice level. "And what's my role in this arrangement?" Trevor leaned back with a satisfied smile. "You get to enjoy the income without the headaches. Think of it as being a silent partner. You provide the assets, I provide the expertise, and we both benefit." A silent partner. He wanted me to hand over control of my inheritance and trust him to manage it, the same man who'd driven us into debt with his reckless schemes. "What percentage of the profits are you proposing for yourself?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "I was thinking a 70-30 split would be fair," he said casually. 70 for you, 30 for me, plus a base management fee of $800 per month." I did the math in my head. Based on his projections, the properties would generate about $5,500 monthly. His 30% share would be $1,650, plus his $800 fee, nearly $2,500 a month, almost half the total income for managing properties I owned. "That seems like a lot," I said carefully. Trevor's smile tightened. "Ruth, professional property management typically costs 15 to 20% of rental income. What I'm proposing is actually quite reasonable when you factor in my experience and the additional income I'll generate." But I saw through his manipulation. He was framing this as a generous offer when he really wanted to control my assets and extract as much profit as possible. "I need to think about this," I said, gathering his documents. Trevor's hand shot out to stop me. "Ruth, don't overthink this. Opportunities like this don't come along every day. The longer you wait, the more money you're losing." There was an edge to his voice now, the familiar pressure he'd used to bully me into compliance during our marriage. "You said I could take time to think about it," I reminded him. "That was before I put together this comprehensive plan," he replied, his tone growing aggressive. "I've invested considerable time and effort into analyzing your situation. The least you could do is give me a definitive answer." I stood up, feeling claustrophobic in my own living room. "Trevor, I need time to think. That's my final answer for tonight." His face darkened with frustration. "You know what your problem is, Ruth? You've never been able to see the big picture. You get caught up in minor details and miss obvious opportunities. That's why you're a dental hygienist instead of running your own practice." The insult hit exactly where he'd intended, targeting the insecurities he'd spent years nurturing. But instead of shame, I felt a surge of cold, clear anger. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" he replied, stunned. I said, "Get out. Take your condescending attitude and your manipulative business proposal and leave my apartment." Trevor's mouth fell open. "Ruth, you're overreacting. I'm trying to help you." "You're trying to help yourself," I interrupted, my voice gaining strength. "You think I don't see what this is? You want to take control of my inheritance and use it to benefit yourself, just like you did during our marriage." "That's ridiculous," he sputtered, his face flushing red. "I'm offering you legitimate business expertise." "You're offering to steal my assets legally," I shot back. "A 70/30th split plus management fees, full operational authority? Do you think I'm stupid, Trevor?" He stood up, his composure crumbling. "Maybe if you'd learned anything about business instead of spending your evenings playing with teeth, you'd understand what a good deal looks like. Maybe if you'd learned anything about honesty instead of scheming for easy money, you'd understand why I don't trust you," I retorted. We stared at each other across the coffee table, 15 years of resentment hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Trevor grabbed his folder and stormed toward the door. "You're making a mistake, Ruth," he said coldly. "You're going to lose everything because you're too proud to accept help from someone who actually knows what they're doing." "We'll see about that," I replied. After Trevor left, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Janet, recounting the confrontation. "He's not going to give up," I told her. "He's already drawn up business plans and partnership agreements. He thinks I'll fold under pressure." "How do you feel about that?" Janet asked. I took a sip of wine and considered the question. Angry, definitely. Insulted, absolutely. But beneath those emotions was something new, a fierce determination that surprised me with its intensity. "I feel like I'm finally ready to fight back," I said. "Trevor's been underestimating me for so long that he's forgotten I'm not the same person who let him walk all over me during our marriage." "Good," Janet said firmly. "Because tomorrow, we're going to start building your defenses. And Ruth, by the time we're done, Trevor's going to wish he'd never heard about your inheritance." By Friday afternoon, I signed the final documents establishing the Patterson Family Trust and Suncaster Property Management, LLC. Howard Brennan had worked swiftly, creating an ironclad legal structure that gave me complete control over my properties, while shielding them from any outside interference. "Your ex-husband has no legal standing to claim any involvement in these assets," Howard explained as I reviewed the paperwork. "The trust is revocable only by you, and the LLC requires your signature for any major decisions. Even if he convinced you to enter a partnership, it would have to be approved by the trust and documented through the LLC." I felt a surge of satisfaction as I signed the final page. For the first time since inheriting the properties, I felt truly secure in my ownership. That evening, Trevor called while I was cooking dinner. "Ruth, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I want to apologize for being pushy. Why don't we start over? Maybe I could just consult on a few small decisions, help you get oriented without any formal partnership." I almost laughed at his transparent attempt to backpedal. "Actually, Trevor, I've made some decisions about the properties," I said pleasantly. "I've established a property management company and set up all the legal structures I need. I won't be needing your services." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "You did what?" he finally asked, his voice tight. "I hired a lawyer and set up proper business entities to manage my inheritance," I replied. "Everything's been legally established and documented." "Ruth, you can't just make decisions like that without consulting someone who understands the implications," he said, his frustration palpable. "I can, and I did," I interrupted. "The properties are protected under a trust, and I'm the sole trustee and beneficiary. There's no role for outside partners or managers." His voice sharpened. "You're making a serious mistake. You don't have the experience to handle this alone." "I guess we'll find out," I said, and hung up. Trevor's response came faster than I'd expected. The following Tuesday, he showed up at my dental practice during my lunch break, striding in with the confidence of someone who thought he still had leverage. "Ruth, we need to talk," he announced loudly, drawing the attention of my coworkers. Dr. Henderson looked up from his desk, concern etched on his face. "This is my workplace, Trevor," I said firmly. "Whatever you want to discuss can wait until after hours." "This can't wait," he insisted. "You've made serious legal errors with those property documents, and I'm trying to save you from a costly mistake." I could feel my coworkers watching. Dr. Henderson stood up, ready to intervene. "Mr. Patterson," he said politely but firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a medical practice, not a place for personal disputes." Trevor's face flushed red. This is about protecting Ruth's financial future. She signed documents she doesn't understand. "The documents were prepared by a qualified estate attorney," I said coldly. "Everything is perfectly legal and properly executed." "You think you're so smart," Trevor snapped, his composure shattering. "But you're going to lose everything because you're too stubborn to listen to advice from someone who actually knows what they're doing." Dr. Henderson moved toward the phone. "I'm calling security." Trevor shot me one final glare before storming out. As the door slammed behind him, I realized I was shaking not with fear, but with adrenaline. I'd stood up to him publicly and won. "Ruth, are you all right?" Dr. Henderson asked gently. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it. Absolutely perfect. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, in control of my own life, ready for whatever came next. Trevor's attempts to manipulate his way into my inheritance had backfired spectacularly. Within weeks of my rejection, word spread through Phoenix's real estate community about his unprofessional pursuit of a client's assets. His employer, already concerned about his declining performance, reassigned him to lower-level properties and eventually let him go when his behavior became a liability. His reputation in the industry was permanently damaged, forcing him to take a low-paying job with a small firm in another state, a far cry from the career he'd boasted about. 2 years later, I stood in the courtyard of my newest acquisition, a charming duplex in Scottsdale, purchased with profits from my existing properties. Suncaster Property Management had grown into exactly what I'd envisioned, a small but thriving business built on fair dealings and genuine care for both properties and tenants. My tenants, like Mrs. Rodriguez, appreciated my commitment to maintaining their homes and keeping rents reasonable, fostering loyalty that kept vacancies low. Looking back on that frightening yet exhilarating time when Trevor tried to seize control of my inheritance, I realized his manipulation had given me the greatest gift of all, the final push to discover just how capable I truly was. I wasn't just a dental hygienist. I was a businesswoman, a landlord, and a woman who'd reclaimed her power. And no one, not Trevor, not anyone, could take that away from me. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.